Hi everyone, welcome back to Lunch and Learn 2023. We are Parshas B'Shalach, which obviously in Parshas B'Shalach, not Parshas B'Shalach, we're in Parshas Yisro. We were in Parshas B'Shalach when I announced we're going to start again. We're now Parshas Yisro when Moshe Rabbeinu's father-in-law comes and in a very courageous move criticizes Moshe Rabbeinu on how he's running things, which obviously sets the tone for the Jewish people nowadays are always criticizing our leaders and how they run things because everyone knows better. In Yisro's case, Moshe Rabbeinu actually listened to him and began to run things the way Yisro said, and it turned out better. So that's the parasha of the week, and obviously in this week's parasha we also hear the HaSodeh, the Ten Commandments. Obviously, the major question is asked: why do we only hear the Ten Commandments once Yisro came? What was about Yisro that actually unified the Jewish people? And one of the answers, which is a beautiful answer, is that when Yisro joined after Yisro came, we don't know. There's various sources whether Yisro actually was there for the Ten Commandments, but it was only in this week's parasha when he came. And that a beautiful answer I've heard recently is that. When Yisro came to join the Jewish people or to acknowledge the oneness of God, that showed that the permeation, the oneness of God was no longer limited to the Jewish people, but rather gradually was beginning to spread. And when Yisro joined the Jewish people, according to Medrash, bought Sephora to Moshe Rabbeinu, because Sephora wasn't part of Yisro's Mitzrayim, she was living with her father. And once the Jewish people got to Mount Sinai, that's when Yisro actually brought Sephora down once it was safe in order to let her rejoin Moshe Rabbeinu with their two sons. And by him joining, that signified the beginning of a new era, and that's when Hashem decided that now was the right time for HaSodeh. But that was a very brief idea. I'm not actually talking about the parasha this week, rather I want to talk about what happened yesterday, and that is Tu B'Shvat, the 15th day of the month of Shvat. L'chaim. So Tu B'Shvat is known as Rosh Hashanah Leilonis, the New Year for trees. And there's hundreds of essays, articles, talks, divrei Torah, sichos, messages to learn from Tu B'Shvat. I'm going to touch on a few. The main pasuk associated with Tu B'Shvat is got this mixed up yesterday, so I'll try and get it right this way. HaOdam hu HaSodeh. That Adam, we'll touch on why I'm not translating properly now, but Adam is like a tree of the field. That's the simple explanation. And it's the actual pasuk in context, the verse in context is referring to the prohibition of chopping a tree down. You don't have to chop a tree down. Why? Because it says that just like a person, you can't just randomly kill people you want. So too, you can't go around chopping down trees, specifically fruit trees. So halacha, which type of tree it was, specifically, this is relating to fruit trees. You can't just chop down a fruit tree when it's convenient. Just like if a person gets in your way, you can't just chop them down. And a person is like a tree, therefore you can't chop down a tree. That's the context of the actual pasuk. Taking it one step further, the simple explanation, the classic explanation given about the connection between a person and a fruit tree and a tree is that classically is a tree has roots. The deeper the roots, the stronger the tree. This corresponds to the idea that a person who is tapped into their traditions or rooted deeply within the way they've been brought up, within their Yiddishkeit, their connection to their ancestry, and even if they don't have ancestry, they develop roots to be connected to those to the history. It strengthens who they are. And then there's the trunk. Obviously, the bigger the trunk, usually the stronger the tree, the more rings, shows that it's aged. This is associated with wisdom. It's associated with development of intellect, focusing on your core belief systems, to understand your core belief systems, not just what we call emunah, where you just simply believe, but rather you actually understand what your core belief systems are about. Throughout the ages, we have the Chachamim, over thousands of years worth of knowledge, understanding them, learning the Torah. This develops your core focus and your core strength of your connection of who you are, of the development of who you are, what you are, and who you're about. And then you have the branches. The branches are obviously spread out. The bigger the branches, it shows the health of the tree. And this is symbolized by one's desire to protect those around them, and not just desire, but also the ability to protect those around them, to help those around them, and give shade. And obviously, if you are able to, you should. And then finally, you have the fruits. The fruit, because we're talking about fruit tree, and we have the fruits which symbolize, in the classic sense, is your mitzvahs, the good deeds, the inspiration you plant, the inspiration you encourage others, you inspire others, the mitzvahs you do in your own life. These are all connected also to the fruit of the fruit tree, because obviously when the fruit drops and it creates a new tree. So too, when one inspires another yid or inspires someone else to be a better person, then you have created a new tree, a new growth around you. But there's a couple of questions we have about this pasuk, this verse, as well as just in general the concept of why Tu B'Shvat is called the Rosh Hashanah of Elonos, Rosh Hashanah tree. So let's start with that one. Why do we focus on that Rosh Hashanah, that Tu B'Shvat, the 15th of the Shvat, is called Rosh Hashanah? If you look at all the other Rosh Hashanahs, we know we have 4 Rosh Hashanahs, 4 heads of the years. We've got Rosh Hashanah for animals, when you would actually start counting the animals, for Maestros, for tithing. That was on, that's Rosh Chodesh El, the beginning of the month of the first day of the month of El. You have the counting of kings. When a king was coronated, the year would only begin from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first day of the month of Nisan. Then you have Tishrei, Aleph Tishrei, which is the Rosh Hashanah for Chodshayim, for months, and obviously Rosh Hashanah for few humans. And then lastly, then you have Tu B'Shvat. And Tu B'Shvat, though, is on the 15th of Shvat, while the other 3 was Aleph Shvat, was all on the first day of the month. So why is Tu B'Shvat chosen to be on the 15th of Shvat? So there's a major debate between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says classically that we always follow potential. So whenever something has the potential to grow or to become, as soon as that potential becomes, as soon as that item has potential, that is what we classify as the beginning. So what case is that? In this case, how does that apply to, in theory, to Rosh Hashanah Le'Elonos? Why Beis Shammai says that Rosh Hashanah Le'Elonos shouldn't be on the 15th of Shvat, rather should be on Aleph Shvat, which would fit in with all the others. Why? Because he says, when do we daven for Chodshayim? When do we daven for how the year should be? On Rosh Hashanah, including one's produce. And therefore, once you daven for produce, that means now it has potential for the produce to be good, which means that on Aleph Shvat, which is the winter months, the beginning of the rain season, Aleph Shvat therefore is exactly the appropriate amount of time when it should start raining. And therefore, Aleph Shvat is when it should be Rosh Hashanah Le'Elonos, the new year for Elonos. Beis Hillel says no. When do we actually really start davening for rain? During Sukkot. Right? Mm-hmm. During Sukkot, which is middle of the month. And therefore, Beis Hillel always says that as soon as something is what we call poil, actuality, not just koyach, which is potential, but actually poil, actuality, when it will actually start, that's when you actually start counting from. And therefore, 15th of Shvat, exactly what we said, 4 months later, the beginning of the rain season, 15th of the month of Shvat, we go according to Beis Hillel. And therefore, it's the 15th of Shvat that we actually start davening for. We actually celebrate the Rosh Hashanah Le'Elonos. There's another beautiful explanation of why we actually focus on Tu B'Shvat as being the Rosh Hashanah Le'Elonos. Why? We're talking about fruit trees. What is the symbolism of fruit? The symbolism of fruit is the sweetness of the Torah. Is the effectively what we call the dessert, which I'll get on in a minute. But this beauty, this sweetness, the reality is you can only eat fruit when it's fully ripe. Torah, what the Torah we learn is the idea of ripeness, it's the idea of expansion, what's called chokhmah. It's this beauty and this wisdom that we're able to tap into. Middle of the month is when the moon is at its brightest, is at its brightness, is at its maximum, which is also connected to the Jewish people. The Jewish people, which follow a lunar calendar, we're compared to the waxing and the waning of the month. Right? Rosh Chodesh, the end of the month, the beginning of the month, and the middle of the month is effectively what we call high tide, is when the moon is at the strongest, and this symbolizes a very positive time for the Jewish people, which is why you have Sukkot and Pesach, both middle of the month. They're both on the 14th and the 15th of the month, symbolizing this power. And therefore, the middle of Shavat, which is when the fruit is when the rain is properly coming, the fruit is, we're talking about fruit trees here, that's why the actual focus of Tu B'Shvat is at this particular moment in the middle of the month. Connected to this expansion, this celebration, this Rosh Hashanah, this beginning of the year to start re-delving into Torah and to start learning again, or to reinvigorate and re-strengthen one connection to learning Torah. So that's one connection. Obviously, the message for us obviously is Tu B'Shvat is not just about eating nice fruit. It's always great to eat nice fruit, but rather also about re-strengthening and rededicating ourselves to our own pursuits in learning and delving into the wisdom of the Torah in its greatest form and its greatest height, not just in potential, in koyach, but rather in pa'ul, in actuality, not just in theory, but actually tachlis, sitting down and establishing for oneself a kiviyas itim, a set time to learn Torah. L'chaim. So that's question one. That's the answer to question one. Why middle of the month? Okay. Question two is we say ki HaOdam hu Eitz HaSodeh. A person, a man, is actually translation, but ki HaOdam Eitz HaSodeh. Why didn't we say ki HaIsh hu Eitz HaSodeh? We know that a man, actually a physical man, a human man, is actually Ish, right? That's the actual name. But in the Torah, there's also two other names: Adam, Ish, Gever, Enish. Thank you. Is it? Yeah, I think it's Enish. Yeah. I think it might be wrong, but we'll stick with Enish because it sounds about right. I did learn on the way here, but there's actually four categories of men. Four Hebrew names for men. Why Adam? Because Adam is the highest level. In Kabbalah, Adam Kadmon, the primordial man, is associated with the level of what we call Atzilus. Adam, in this case, yes, is translated as man, but it's the idea of humanity, not just males, but rather Adam generally incorporates within it all souls, all nefashos, all human souls. And therefore, Davke says, Ki Adam, that Adam, the level of Adam Kadmon, the level of Adam Elyon, the level of this concept of this materialism of manifestation of Atzilus, of the highest levels of this. I'm not going to say that Adam Kadmon represents the concept of godliness, so to speak, but it's this connection that this Adam represents the Adam down here. The humanity down here is connected to above and below, and this Adam Kadmon is therefore also connected to Atzilus, which is the highest of the four worlds, and this Atzilus is connected back down to the first question of Chochmas Hashem, of the expansion, the openness of Torah. Because Chochmas Hashem, the ultimate expansion of the Torah, the ultimate form of Torah, is connected to Atzilus, and therefore when it says Ki HaOdam, that a Adam is a tree of the field, they're all interconnected. You have Adam representing Atzilus representing Chochmah representing the expansion of Torah. And therefore it creates this cycle of connection all around. Which finally brings us to the third question. That's why it specifically focuses Ki HaOdam. Because learning Torah elevates one to connect to those highest levels. You can be a Gever, you can be an Enosh, you can be a Ish, but none of them symbolize one's connection to the ultimate wisdom of God. The only one that does is Adam. So that's the first two questions. The last question, or the last message, which I'll share today, is there is a minhag, a custom on Tu B'Shvat to eat what's called the Shiva minhag, the 7 species of Eretz Yisrael. I'm not going to go exactly why it's connected to Eretz Yisrael, although we know that generally the Jewish people are connected to Eretz Yisrael. It's not just the physical land, but rather the concept of Eretz Yisrael is connected to who the Jewish people are. We are effectively this extension of Eretz Yisrael. That's why whenever Jews leave Eretz Yisrael, we always have this idea of Golos, the idea of returning back to Zion, to return back to the land of Eretz Yisrael, the Eretz HaKodesh, the Holy Land, because we, part of our neshama, part of our souls, is connected to Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, it's accustomed to eat the Shiva Minim, the 7 species. What are the 7 species? So the 7 species, I'm hoping I'm going to get this in the right order, we'll start with the first 2, and that is wheat and barley. So there's many different customs, there's many people hold these Sidorim, these Seders, like a meal, and they actually go through different foods with the Kabbalistic and spiritual meanings. The Arizal actually had a custom of having 15 different species, 15 different fruits by his Seder. Actually, at home I have a list of all those 15 fruits, what they actually mean, what the connections are to Kabbalah, and what the connections are to us on a practical level, to the way we conduct ourselves on a practical level. But let's just do the 7. So first we start off with Chit and Sa'ira, wheat and barley. Why wheat and barley? Wheat is associated with human food. It's food that humans eat. Barley, in the olden days, before we realized how healthy it was associated with animal feed. Right? What's the symbolism there? The symbolism there is that we have 2 souls. We have Nefesh Elikis and Nefesh Bahamis. We have a godly soul, what we call, again, the Odom Kadmon, the primordial soul, which is connected to God above. And we also have an animal soul. And therefore, when you want to reveal Torah, both souls have to be fed. It's not enough you don't have to starve the animal soul. You need the animal soul, because the animal soul is your basic instincts. But you don't have to give it chita, you don't have to give it wheat. You don't have to give it the best of the best. You give it the basics. You give it enough to survive. You give it what you need. And that's the first stage. So the first stage is feed your Odom Elikis, you feed your godly soul the best of the best. What does that mean? Torah mitzvahs. Be immersed in Yiddishkeit. Be in any way you can. I'm not saying everyone has to suddenly become ultra-Orthodox or become Orthodox or keep all 613 mitzvahs. Take one extra mitzvah. Begin to focus on your Nefesh Elikis more than your Nefesh Bahamis. Focus more on what your soul needs versus what your animal soul needs, what your basic instincts need. And that's Chit and Sa'ira, wheat and barley. Then, what's next? Then you have to actually start putting it into practice. How do you feed your animals, your godly soul? How do you feed it? The next stage is, I have to remember the right order here, is grapes. Right, that's the first one. Is grapes is the first one. Why grapes? Because grapes is symbolic of wine. So wine comes from grapes, and we know that what is classically associated with wine, nichnas yain yesesod. Secrets come out. We're not talking about any bad secrets, but it means the inner joy, the inner simcha. Classically, when you drink the right amount of wine, you get happy. It's the first stage. Obviously, there's other stages after, but we're not talking about those other stages. We're talking about classically. There's in the Gemara it says that I believe it was Rabbah or maybe Rava who would eat a bit of meat and drink a bit of wine before he would teach Torah. Why? Because it would help him, slowly expand his chokhmah, expand his wisdom, so he should be able to teach better and absorb more Torah. For us to be able to do mitzvahs, you have to allow your simcha out. There's lots of reasons to have simcha, lots of reasons to have joy. If you don't have any reasons, find a reason. Reasons to be happy in life. Tap into that before you start doing the mitzvahs. But if you can't tap into it, still do the mitzvahs. But first, allow the simcha out, which is grapes. Then we go on to, I did do this before I did go through this, so then we go on to the figs. Why figs? Figs is associated with the first clothing of Adam and Chava. So it's symbolic of clothing. What's clothing? Machshava dibur ma'isa. Thought, speech, and action. Why? Because you can think you want to do something. You can have a desire to do a mitzvah. But unless it comes into machshava, and then goes into dibur, and then goes into ma'isa, unless you actually think through it, work out how to do it, organize it, and actually then do it, it's completely useless. It just remains in the mind, in the rotzen, in the will to do something. That's why you have figs, which teaches us, after you've got your simcha, after you fed your nefesh elikis, you want to do something, then you have the simcha, then you actually have to put it into practice. Then after we have figs, we have rimon, pomegranates. Why pomegranates? Because everything is still a level of potential. What's pomegranates? Pomegranates is associated with Rosh Hashanah, where we say that a person should be filled with zechuyos, with merit, as if they've done the mitzvahs, but they haven't done it yet. We say that every single year is filled with zechus, meaning you have the zechus, but you actually need to do something about it. So how does that incorporate here? Yes, you have machshava deba'maisa. You're actually putting things into action, but there's so much more you can do. There is many other aspects of mitzvahs, many aspects of the Torah that are still waiting to be done. And then that in turn has to then go up to the level of machshava deba'maisa. So we're talking about the rimon is now already dropping down a bit, represents the potential that you still have. So even if you've done the mitzvahs, realize there's still more to do. And therefore, rimon represents this ability for all of us to always grow a bit. One more mitzvah, and don't always be so satisfied on your bench, satisfied on your stirrups, on your perch, something like on laurels and perch, yeah, something like that. Don't be so satisfied. Still got the rimon, the potential. Then we have two left. We have dates, and then we have olives. Olives are the last one, which I'll get to in a minute. What's dates? Dates is symbolic of the devash, the honey. The honey of Eretz Yisrael. Classically, people think when Hashem says, I'm going to bring you to a land of milk and honey, we're thinking honey of the bees. It's not. It's talking about the honey of dates. Eretz Yisrael was known for its dates. Right? Also, the milk was that of goats, wasn't of sheep. But different story for another time. So what is this honey? This honey represents the idea of Eretz Yisrael. What's Eretz Yisrael? Eretz is rotz. It's rotzon. Well, rotz means to run, and rotzon means to have the will and the desire to keep on moving, to keep on going. Therefore, dates, after you've done all the machshav demaisa, then you have you also then have the rimon, which is the pomegranates, which represents the potential rotzon. You have to have the will, the drive to keep on going. It's hard. It's hard. You do a mitzvah, you're happy. Pat yourself on your back. That's it. I've done my mitzvah for the day, right? Rotz. Devash represents Eretz Yisrael. In order for you to make a Eretz, a land that we are connected to, the Shiva Minim is associated with Eretz Yisrael. In order for you to make an Eretz, a land, a place which is fitting for God to dwell in, Rotzon. Rotz. You have to continuously keep on moving. How do you keep on moving? Olives. What's olives? Olives represent olive oil. Olive oil is only brought about through being crushed, which is the concept of humility. Recognizing, I've done a good deed. Okay, that's great. But the world still is still dark. I still have my own ego. I still have my own arrogance, my own, place in this world that I want to succeed in. I have to lower myself a bit and realize, hang on, there's something greater than me. I'm only one of maybe 8 billion people. Be a bit more humble. We don't necessarily mean you have to crush yourself. It doesn't have to be so painful, but step down a bit. Realize there's, something greater than you. When you do that, you're able to then tap into your real potential. And then the whole cycle begins going back up. How? Because when you're humble, when you realize that you aren't the be-all and end-all, then you can realize, hang on, I want to be better. I want to increase. I want to grow. I haven't achieved everything, which takes us back to the devash, the dates. And when you want to start growing and you want to achieve something and you actually have that rotzon, that will to do something, then what do? You start realizing that we have, what's next? Rimon. You have the potential. Have I missed one? No. Yeah. No Rimon. Yeah. You have Rimon. You have the potential. The potential's there. I just have to tap into it. How do I tap into it? Machshav deba'maisa. I have 3 garments I can tap into it. And once I do the machshav deba'maisa, once I tap into it, that takes us up to no. Simcha. I'm skip one. No, I'm skip one. Takes us up to Simcha. Why? Because now I know that I have the ability, I have the will, I can achieve something in this world. That brings me Simcha, which is Yayin. And when I have Simcha, I'm able to know the difference between my Nefesh HaBahamis, which is Bali, and my Nefesh HaLekis, which is godliness, and able to have joy in that, and say, you know what? I want to feel my Nefesh HaLekis. And that's why we have the Shiva Minim.